It's a pleasure to welcome you all to SOAS Centre of Yoga Studies. My name is Jacqueline Hargreaves, Manager of the Centre, and it's with great anticipation and excitement that we welcome you to the launch of Dr. Daniela Bevilacqua's book, From Tapas to Modern Yoga, Sādhus' Understanding of Embodied Practices. As we proceed this evening, it's possible for members of the audience to enter questions via the Q&A window of this webinar, and these questions will be moderated. We'll attempt to address some of them during the Q&A segment towards the end of the program. So to begin this evening, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Raphaël Voix, who will be our esteemed respondent to this most important and recent publication. Raphaël Voix is a social anthropologist and senior research fellow at the French National Centre for Scientific Research. He's a member of the Centre of South Asian and Himalayan Studies, Paris, and an associate member of the French Institute of Pondicherry. He holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of Paris West Notre-Dame de France and an MA in Bengali from the National Institute of Oriental Languages and Civilization. His research focuses on sectarian Hinduism in West Bengal, where he's conducted extensive fieldwork and returns on a regular basis. Most specifically, he's worked on movements such as the Baal, the Ananda Marg, Bharat Ashram Sangha, and Satan Dao. While his PhD was on the articulation of asceticism, violence and utopia and tantric texts, he has since worked on the articulation of ascetics with the political through studies on militant mobilization, the judicial, and sacred sites. He's co-authored multiple volumes, including Filing Religion, State, Hinduism and Courts of Law, Wayside Shrines, Everyday Religion in Urban India, and Asia in COVID Times. His work has been published extensively in edited volumes and academic journals, both in French and English, and since 2022, he has been conducting research on the institutionalization of yoga in contemporary India through its implementation in public universities and hospitals, a project for which he's been posted for 3 years at the French Institute of Pondicherry in India. So Dr. Voix, thank you.
Well, good evening, all of you. And thank you so much, Jackie, for this very kind presentation. And I would like to thank you and thank also Professor Ulrich Pagel for this invitation. It's a really great joy for me to be here and to have had the opportunity to read in detail Daniela's last book. And I considered it an honor that the SOAS gave me to discuss it now live with you, Daniela. So I see this presentation as a discussion between the two of us and then all the crowd here. And I would first introduce you, Daniela, and then I will give you the floor so that you can present and talk a bit and present maybe quickly present also your book. And then I will take back the floor to highlight a few distinguishing features of your book that I really enjoyed. And then I will engage with you in its content by, exchanging questions. And so most of you already know Daniela Bevilacqua. She's an Indianist specialized in Hindu asceticism. And she has investigated both through ethnographic and historical research. So she received her PhD in Civilization of Africa and Asia from Sapienza University in Roma and a PhD in Anthropology from the University of Paris, Nanterre, under the direction of Véronique Bouillet. And drawing on extensive fieldwork, a co-direction of Véronique Bouillet. Drawing on extensive fieldwork, her PhD focused on the Ramanandi order, which is the biggest Vaishnava religious order at present in northern India. And she's precisely focused on the independent struggle of this group of Ramanandi from the Ramanujis, which led to the creation of the role of the Jagat Guru Ramanandacharya and the construction of the Srimat. This work has been published under the title Modern Hindu Traditionalism in Contemporary India in 2018, if I'm not wrong. And from 2015 to 2020, she was a postdoc research fellow at the SOAS for the ERC-funded Hatha Yoga project under the direction of Jim Mallinson. So she conducted an extensive research on the embodied practices of Sādhus in contemporary India, a work that has been published under the title From Tapas to Modern Yoga, Sādhus' Understanding of Embodied Practices, published just now, and the reason for which we are all together here tonight. She is currently a researcher at CRIA in Lisbon as the PI, so of the project performing the sacred ethnographies of transgender activism in the Kinnar Akhara. On top of many edited volumes, and she has written several articles and book chapters on topics related to Hindu religious traditions, gender, and embodied practices. And before giving the floor to you, I just wanted to apologize everyone for my broken English tonight. The floor is yours, Daniela.
It's okay, Raphaël. Welcome to my broken Italian English. So this will be, I think, a very fun dialogue between us. And so basically now I have the time to introduce my book, but for me it's a bit difficult to talk about what I do. And so first of all, I want to start by thanking different people. First of all, of course, the center was organized this discussion, Jackie, Ulrich Pegel, and Raphaël for having accepted to read the book, who actually was out in August. And so probably he had to rush a bit to finish and to take notes and so on. But after this, I really want to first and foremost thank the ERC Hatha Yoga project and Jim Mallinson, first of all, because he gave me this incredible opportunity to work for 5 years as a postdoc in such a great in such a great project. Basically, when he asked me to join the Hatha Yoga project, I was finishing my PhD. So he really trusted me and entrusted me with such a huge task, and gave me also a lot of freedom to do the research, to do a lot of field work, because this is what I love of this project and of being an academic. And so doing a lot of ethnographic work is also, I have to thank also Véronique Bouillet for the fact that she gave me the skills, let's say, of doing ethnographic research, because she also take this challenge that is me, because when, as you said, she was my co-supervisor during the PhD, and I never studied anthropology or ethnography. So I think I was a bit challenging for her to be her student as a postdoc, as a PhD student. And so I really thank her a lot for all the support and all the tips and the hints that she gave me to cover all the years that I didn't study anthropology or ethnography. And so that was wonderful for the PhD, and all that I learned at that time was very useful for the Hatha Yoga project, and that's why she's among the people that I acknowledge at the beginning of the book. And then, of course, I have to say thank you, a huge thank you to all the people I met, all the Sādhus, basically, because without Sādhus, without the people I met in different orders, this book would be like completely impossible. And that's why maybe you will stress that, but there is an appendix of the book where I mention all the 109 people, let's say the most important people that participate in this project, because I think sometimes we don't mention them enough, like their name, who are they, the background, and I think this should have been acknowledged. At least in my case, I could do that. And so I really have to thank all the Sādhus, all the Jim, and of course also, and sorry if I mentioned just now, but also the other members of the ERC, because when I started the Hatha Yoga project, my knowledge of yoga was very superficial. I've been doing yoga in India, but I didn't dig a lot about it. And so I really learned a lot through Mark Singleton, Jason Birch, even through Jackie. They really helped me a lot to try to put together all the knowledge, like from the field and then the textual sources. So I think this book is actually the result of so much support that I got from several people. And in fact, there's not a lot of theory in there because, I don't know, I prefer more to collect the voices of others. That's why also I don't like to talk too much about what I do, because it's like I feel to be a kind of collector somehow of this kind of knowledge. And then I want to thank also the publisher, Equinox Publishing, because I don't know if I can do this kind of advertisement or publicity, but it was a pleasure to work with them, because usually when you work with a publisher, they have their strict rules. You have to publish according to their, editing and this and that. Well, they gave me freedom. And so I'm very happy about also the aesthetic result of the book. And I don't know if you noticed, Raphaël, there is a very weird map of India in the book. I made it like by hand, because making a map of India is a bit complicated because of the boundaries, especially Kashmir and this and that. So they didn't want to take any risk. And I say, like, I will make it. It's just a draft. So it's just my responsibility that you will find this weird map of India done by myself, because, I mean, I like doing the sketch, and yeah, they accepted even that. So I'm very glad that I chose this publisher. And after so many thanks to so many people, the publisher and so on, I want to, stress immediately what are the limits of this book, so that you don't have to do that, because I know really that there are a lot of limits. First of all, because it's an ethnographic research. So it means done by one person and limited time, and limited time because I did a lot of field work, but the time of the project was 5 years, and I focus on 4 main sampradayas, religious orders, and there are many more. That's the fact. So it's really a kind of a portion of what is the Sādhus society, and of course the areas, the places could have been much more. So it's a limited research, I would say, and strictly depending on the possibility of one person. And then I think that another limit is I didn't have time to work on vernacular sources, which instead I would have loved. And I collected several materials from centers, but I didn't have the time to work on them and to make make them more concrete, like to be part of the book. So there are different things that could be improved, and that for the research, I mean, I think this is a topic that needs further research, because as I always say, when I started the Hatha Yoga project, I thought like, okay, there would be plenty of information about the practices of Sādhus, because it started in that context. And so it should have been more, and it's not. So it means that there is a big opportunity for a lot of scholars, students, PhD students, or postdoc researchers to actually engage with this field, with different religious orders and so on. What else I can say? Yeah, I would say that also, but this is also part of my approach. I didn't get Diksha, so initiation. So basically the book, I think, from my perspective, remains on the surface, because it's what can be shared with the community of people who are not initiated. And still, I feel also very much privileged, because despite not being initiated, I was able to get a lot just because I was a foreigner, a white foreigner in India. And I think we should always acknowledge our privilege, especially when we are doing research. And so I think this is something that I think scholars, academics, but also in general, practitioners have always to take into consideration, which are the power dynamics that are present while you are doing research, while you are practicing something, while you are going in India, and more awareness of that should be part of the conversation. And I think I'm done basically, because I don't know what else I could say about my book. And I want to give you much more space. And because I like dialogues, so I think we can engage more in Q&A.
Sure. So let's do it like this. So instead of reading also things that I've written, I'll also react directly to what you said, because I think it's more lively. And I think everybody heard now by just what Daniela said, two actually amazing qualities that are entrenched in her book, which are first, humility. It is all along the book, it is very clear the way you are gathering your data, the respect you have for the people you are with, and even I would say the love that you have for these people. And this is something we can feel all along the book. And we come reading the book, we are with you. We start to love each of these single personality, because you are able to bring them alive in your book. And as you said, the appendix at the end does this, and it does a great job. And we all at the end want to go and meet them. And some are really, and they're all very interesting and funny and original characters, of course. And together with this humility that compels you to be very strict on the way you gather the data, and very also clear for the reader on how you had access to this data. There's also another great quality that goes all along through the book. It's the ambition. And this is, I think, two contradictory kind of qualities that go actually very well together in this book. There's a real ambition to kind of gather this new subject. Your book is completely innovative because you're asking a question, which is, what are these embodied practices that these Sādhus do? And you are doing it in a completely new way, because you are doing it through, as you just said, going above sampradayas, above religious orders, and taking all these ascetics, or these Sādhus, we'll come back to these terms, together. So humility, and at the same time, a real, I think, scientific ambition to try not only to gather this practice above these sampradayas, but also to situate them in a historical context. And I think this is also very striking when we read your book, is that you're all along in conversation with Indologists. You're all along in conversation with the work of people that are looking at the text and trying to see these embodied practices within the text. Yet, your work is super hard. Why? Because when we look at text, usually it's easier to see similarities, to see regularities, right? And then to see change in the long run. But when we do anthropology, which is what you are doing, we are confronted into a great variety of realities, right? And we have only singularities. We have only different kind of discourse that are all the time contradicting each other, right? And although you are dealing with that, still the book is extremely clear all along. We don't get completely lost into all these contradictory discourses and practices, or understanding of same practices, because you are trying to put them in order and to see. So this really is something that is absolutely striking. And that's why I find this book absolutely fascinating. And I believe it's a must read for anyone who actually is interested in the religious culture of Asia. So it is ethnographically really innovative, and you're really it's an attempt, sorry, to remedy the lack of information on this embodied practice. But it's also, and I think it must be underlined, a book that is super readable for non-academics. And you offer us all along, not only your ethnography, but also great synthesis of the work that other people have done on the history of these different practices in the long run. And you do it in a very clear manner. And so I really think it's very accessible. And lastly, as I quickly mentioned, it is extremely enjoyable to read because, again, you're making these people live in front of us. But one last quality of these different qualities I want to underline is I think that your humility and the ambition makes your book actually, it will be a lasting book. And what you just said when you said, well, I don't like to go too much in theory. It's something actually I do appreciate a lot in your book. And I will come back to that later. I appreciated it a lot because then it gives more space to the actual practices that we can see today. And as you say, you're a transmitter of these practices. So in 20 years, your book will still be interesting for people because they will be able to go and look at what was happening in from 2015 to 2020, right? Or 2018 to 2024. All right. So now I would like to present a bit more your fieldwork, because I think you quickly mentioned it, but I would like to underline a few aspects of this fieldwork because I do think that the way you engage with your fieldwork is absolutely a model for many anthropologists. And I would like, if any students are here to listen, that I think it's your positionality, for example, is extremely inspiring. As we know, any fieldwork in anthropology is something we cannot learn. As you said, I didn't learn fieldwork. You said I didn't study anthropology, I didn't learn fieldwork. But actually, a fieldwork is not something that you can learn. You can only learn it by doing it. And by doing it, you do make a certain number of choices that then will transform, of course, the material you gather, or not transform the material, but will color the material you gather. And what is absolutely enjoyable in your book is that you are very clear on the choices you made. You just gave one choice that you made, and I will underline it. While you are working with people that are structured around the initiatic boundaries, this Guru Shishya Parampara, you have chosen not to take initiation. And I think this is a very wise decision. Firstly, because as you explained clearly, it gave you the freedom to go from one sadhu to another. And it also gave you the freedom to ask them questions, which are two things that is now possible once you engage into a hierarchic relationship of learning a specific sadhana. Secondly, it's important and wise, I think, because it's ethical. Because as you said, you didn't choose, it would not have been ethical to take initiation just to give information and give it to the world. And thirdly, because anthropologists who are really initiated are bound to have a problem because they have usually taken an oath to keep secret what has been revealed to them. And in your case, your informants were always fully aware of your role and the work that you were doing. So this is your first choice. It's very important to remember it. The second choice you make, which is very interesting also, is that you choose to follow individuals independently of their sectarian affiliation. And you did it by doing an amazing itinerant fieldwork that engaged you in a way, in a mode of life close to that of the people that you were studying. As you write, you followed the route of the religious festival and the mobility of the Sādhus. And this, I mentioned it already, but quickly, you presented also with great honesty. And And this is important. I'll tell you why. There is something in the book where you present with lots of clarity your data. And we know that in anthropology, what distinguishes anthropology from other social sciences is this use of the fieldwork as a research method, right? But we know also that this essence of fieldwork is a direct experience like you had, which is interpersonal and therefore intersubjective. In other words, with the same people, I would probably not have gotten exactly the same information as you. And this has a direct impact on the production of knowledge. And whereas in history or Indology, another researcher can reread archives or text analyzed by colleagues that have commented on them before, this is not possible in anthropology. And because anthropologists are the only one who produce their own material, which are the information and observation and their interpretation. But in your case, I think, is an exception to that. In the way that you are very clear, as I said before, in the way you collected the information, and then you are offering the material to the reader. So you are allowing the reader to make his or her own reading of your material. So then we can discuss the interpretation that you make of this material, of certain facts. And that's what we will do now during this discussion. I thank you also very much for the way that, again, you presented your engagement with the people you were. Because one has to understand that doing a field work like this with these people is it's not only the matter of a power relation, as you mentioned, but it's also a matter of time. You engage sorry, I'll find some talking in the other way that I wanted to talk, but anyway, you engage in very long field work for many years. You have attempted to engage with different ascetics. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. Sometimes you got expelled. Sometimes it took days to actually engage in a relation. Sometimes you had to get up super early. Sometimes you had to deal with environments that were difficult. So you had some patience, you had some tenacity, and you had, I guess, a respect for the people that you were engaging with that enabled them to be in a certain kind of confidence with you. And that is fieldwork, is this capacity also to open up a relationship beyond what usually are the restriction of usual life. And I think this is very important to mention. I also would like to thank you for what you said about your positionality, because when you said just now that it's important, you didn't really know yoga before. Well, I think it's a quality, because you didn't arrive with all this preconceived notion of research practitioner that as we say now, where there's already a kind of an idea of what should be or not yoga. And I think you stay open to all the different interpretations of yoga all along your fieldwork. And I think this is very interesting. And also, I would like to thank you for the way you engage with that, saying that compared to this post-colonial question that how the ethnologist or the anthropologist changes the world that he sees, you show well that actually it's not in that direction, that your present doesn't modify completely what you're actually observing, right? But in the other direction, that probably the fact that you stayed such a long time with all these Sādhus actually has modified yourself, but that it is not the question here. And your book is not dealing with this kind of auto-ethnography or psychoanalysis of what it has changed in you, because it's not the subject, because the subject here is these Sādhus. And I think you just mentioned it very clearly, and I thank you also for that, because it makes this book enjoyable, because we learn a lot about these people. So thank you. Now, let's enter the discussion. Or maybe shall I just quickly, maybe for the public here present, the way you presented your data. So basically, the book is divided into 7 chapters. The first one deals with Hindu asceticism and religious movement, which is a long history of sampradayas in the long term. Then the ascetic path of traditional sampradayas. Then the Tapas, from the past to the present. Then Hatha Yoga, from historical and ethnographic perspective. And each of the chapter is always combining a historical and an ethnographic perspective from the 3rd chapter onwards. Then you concentrate on the external practices of the yoga sadhana, and on the internal practices of the yoga sadhana, and then on the articulation between modern yoga and what you call traditional sadhus. Then we have 2 appendix. One is on the religious festivals that you have attended, and the second appendix that you mentioned on the different sadhus, which is so enjoyable because we see each of the individual. So now I would like to engage on one of the first, I think, great point that I would like to discuss with you is this articulation between embodied practices and the community of belonging. As I said earlier, what is actually very innovative in your work is that you are trying to go above the different sampradayas, and you're engaging with individuals that belong to different sampradayas or different sets. And it is interesting because you show us things that we would not have seen if we would have concentrated in only one sampradaya. And you show us that actually ideas and practices are flowing without sectarian barriers. I quote you. Not only historically, you show it well, but also in today's world. But if we take this as true, it would mean that attitudes towards the divine would have very little consequences on one's embodied practices. And namely, that one of the main distinctions that has been made within the realm of sectarian Hinduism, namely the distinction between Shaivites and Vaishnavas, or the followers of Shiva on one side and the devotees of Vishnu on the other side, are useless if we considered embodied practice. And this would be quite something. This has quite some great consequences in anthropology. So I would be ready to follow you on that, because I know, like you, that actually fieldwork complicates a lot the reality that we do find in text. And I also see, like you, that the individual path of its sadhus, its ascetics, is crucial to understand its own ideas and practices, and we'll come back also to that later. But I wonder to which extent is the case, looking even at your own data. As you said, while your research is extremely large, and it is really large, I mean, super impressive. I'm super impressed by all the time you spent and the people you met there. But you focus your attention, as you say, on 4 traditional ascetic orders, and you choose them specifically because they are connected to Hatha Yoga. You mentioned that. That is the yogis from the Nat Sampradaya, the sannyasis and nagas from the Dasnami Sampradaya, the Tyagis and Mahatyagis from the Ramanandi Sampradaya, and a few Udasi from the Udasiyaka. But moreover, because again, you're very clear on your data, so we can discuss that. You explained that you have interviewed 109 sadhus. I mean, it's a lot, because one has to understand again that sometimes you spend 10 days just to have 20 minutes of conversation with one sadhu, right? So it's very important. The time you spend, the patience you had, it's amazing qualities for an anthropologist. So 109 sadhus in all, and among them 32 are Nats, 47 are Dasnami, 4 are Udasi, and 26 are Vaishnava. Thus, if we bring all these together, dividing them between Shaivite and Vaishnava, then it would be more like 2/3 of Shaivites, right? At least. And if we call now the people that you actually mentioned with precision about concerning the embodied practices that you show us, this majority of Shaivite, or the number of Shaivite, is even a bit greater. Therefore, I would like to know whether you believe today that Vaishnava and Shaiva are similarly inclined to this yoga practice. Because there's some elements in your books that could prove that this is also, that this distinction is still useful. For example, at one point you say, that the title of Yogi Raj, for example, is not compatible with bhakti, with bhajan, with puja, right? You also show so well that some forms of tapas are doing by Shaivite, but are criticized by Vaishnavas, right? So I just would like to hear you on that, to elaborate a bit more on the importance or the useless of this distinction that has always been made, and we all live with that when we research between Shaiva, and Vaishnava, when we considered the embodied practices. That would be my first kind of a important question.
Important and huge question, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Raphaël. First of all, because you really went very deep into the book, and I love the fact that you are an anthropologist. I mean, I have to clarify that I don't define myself an anthropologist just because there are people like you who really engage with the discipline, and I prefer to describe myself an ethnographer because I really like the method. Too. Yes, great. We are on the same page. Today we discovered we are always on the same page. So I really like doing ethnography. That's why I spent a lot of time there. And I think it's doing ethnography that one really understands the fluidity of the Sadhu Samaj, the society of Sādhus. But I mean, the fact that the society is fluid doesn't mean that these distinctions, Shaiva or Vaishnava, are not useful, even for the embodied practice, because we have to see the embodied practice in its totality. That means it's a tool which has a specific goal. And so the goal is what makes important the practice, of course, and the goal is what will tell you who is the sadhu engaging with embodied practice. And this is something that I wanted, I mean, the fact that I engage with the 4 orders is also to stress how complicated is the sadhu society, because often we have this idea of the sannyasin, and the idea of the sannyasin, the sadhu actually celebrate his own death, became a kind of, this is the sadhu, yellow, ochre, saffron robes, and renouncing to the Brahmanical society and so on. But I think this really limits the reality of the Sadhu society, and that's why I think to keep the differences among the different orders is fundamental, to keep the fact that they aim at different goals, religious goals. So a Shaiva religious goals won't be the same as a Vaishnava. Because if we take, I mean, I focus on the Ramanandi Sampradaya, and they are Vishishta Dvaita Vedantin. So their approach to God is different. Their religious goal is different compared to a sannyasin, because a sannyasin will look for moksha. A Nat Yogi will find the moksha and the powers, while a Vaishnava, the main goal of the embodied practice remains bhakti. And so I think this is really important to keep in mind, not to homogenize the sadhus, because this is, I mean, when I was looking at, there are a lot of works that actually talk about sadhus, and maybe they describe a little bit the differences, the tilak, this and that, but the core is actually what they are aiming for. And I think that's huge, because we have this idea of moksha, to ending the cycle of reincarnation, but many Vaishnava sadhus, they will do all the tapasya, all the yoga sadhana, but their main goal will remain bhakti, and will remain the darshan, the vision of God, or even to reborn in one of the plane of Vishnu, for example, to continue doing the lila for the main deities. So I think these are differences that we have to keep in mind to properly understand the embodied practice. Because otherwise it's just a description of something. But if you don't connect the method with the result, then it remains a bit empty. And also, for example, as you mentioned, not all the sadhus, especially for tapasya, it's a big difference to be a Vaishnava or a Shaiva, because the approach to the Brahmanical world is completely different. Sannyasin, since they celebrate the Antin Sanskar, they are dead to the Brahmanical society. While the Vairagi, the Vaishnava, they are Tyagi, they are detached. And this is a big difference, like to be detached from the Brahmanical society, but somehow being related to it, and to be deaf to that. And I mean, these parts, and that's why Vaishnava and the Tyagi still consider some rules of purity when they do the tapasya, when they do the practices, where they engage in the sadhu society. And so these are important things to understand, to see what is happening, and how also how you have to behave among the sadhus. Because of course, in a Vaishnava context, you will have to follow some rules that maybe are not the same in a Shaiva or not sadhus context. So it's important to understand. I mean, for me, spending time is really to look and try to get this kind of dynamics, knowledge. And I mean, for example, if you spend time with sadhus, you understand that even how they speak about things, they have secret words. So that, I mean, that's why you have to acknowledge the differences to understand all other things that can be also the embodied practices. Did I convince you?
Absolutely. I'm convinced. And now I have one, you just employed many times this expression of sadhu samaj. And this is something that I'm interested in. And also this, you just mentioned the idea that we have a sannyasin, the sadhu, you talk also about ascetics. So I'm trying, like you, to try to, I mean, to do something with this very complex reality.
Yeah.
So if I have read well, you seem to use interchangeably the ethic term ascetic and the emic term sadhu. And to define the word sadhu, you use a Monye-Williams Sanskrit definition, so that as a good and virtuous person, which is why it is attributed to saint, sage, and holy man. However, we also know that the term sadhu has implied many pejorative meanings from 19th century, and even probably earlier, but from 19th century at least. And thus, that's my impression that not all what I would call ascetic as an ethic category, not all ascetics would recognize themselves as a sadhu. And therefore, I wonder to which extent, what is this extent of the sadhu samaj you are talking about? Is it extremely mobilized within the community you are working with? What are its frontiers? I think it's very interesting, for example, you have all this part also on the relation with Ramdev, for example, this contemporary ascetic, but would he be called a sadhu? Does he take part in the sadhu samaj? Where does he situate himself? It's interesting, for example, you worked also in the Ganga Sagar Mela, I think, in West Bengal, right? Where you went, I think, twice. And I think you described very well all these nagas that are posted in small kind of a box, to show the lay people, what they are and who they are. And we know also that this Mela, so I've been also to this Mela quite a bit, because I was at that time studying another sect that you know, which is called the Bharat Sevashram Sangha, which has a very important place there in the Ganga Sagar Mela, because it actually deals with all the organization, and they have also sannyasis, but they wouldn't call themselves sadhus. And so I wonder to which extent, you know, the sadhus see them as belonging to this sadhu samaj or not. But we could also ask, you know, for example, you mentioned, I don't remember now his name, but I have it, of course, in my notes, you know, this sadhu who is now, you said he's on the verge of the sadhu samaj because he's maybe, he's accused maybe of participating to the killing of, you know, someone around him. And so maybe he will be expelled. So I wonder, where does it end? And what about other people? So I talked about Sevashram Sangha, you talked about Ramdev, but what about other these gurus that also have a big word on yoga in contemporary India? I'm thinking, for example, of Swami Chidananda Sarasvati, you know, the Paramat Niketan in Rishikesh. So yeah, I was just curious about this use of the label ascetics, sadhu, and the extension of this sadhu samaj, as you call it, or as they call it.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I mean, sadhu is a kind of umbrella term, basically, and also using the term sadhu samaj is really to create an umbrella term to collect all different orders, because as you know, there are so many different sampradayas, and some of these are, I would say, traditional in the sense that their lineage is quite, let's say, ancient, that you can trace them, for example, the Ramanandis since the 15th century and so on. And so their lineages, you can track their lineages. And there are some like some gurus that, as you mentioned, that are part of these groups, let's say traditional, but then they took a kind of verge towards a more modern approach. And I think it's very important to understand that the title of the book, my first book, Modern Hindu Traditionalism, it's really to stress this, that we look at Hinduism as something that is Unitarian, but in reality is constructed of several sampradayas and several religious orders, and they have their own identity. And therefore, even the term that they use to define themselves is strictly related to their sampradaya. So that's why sadhu becomes an umbrella term, because otherwise I would have to specify, like, for example, Ramanandi, they call themselves Tyagi, or Mahatyagi, or they call Maharaj, or Mahant. So there are several terms that can be used to be more specific, especially because the society is very hierarchical. And so that's why when you address someone, also, when you're doing that, you are also placing this person in a kind of hierarchy that can be related to the sadhana, that can be related to the position he or she has in the group. So that's why sadhu becomes just a convenient word to put together all these different nuances of what I call, let's say, traditional sampradayas, which with these traditional sampradayas, I'm talking about those who are really related to these Guru Shishya Paramparas, and let's say less affected by modern Hinduism, but it's complicated, because as you know, I mean, it's very complicated, because especially in the last decades with the social media and these and that, the influences are so huge that everything is changing quite quickly.
But precisely, how do you deal? I mean, precisely your work, I was fascinated because you show us how these people who actually belong to traditional sampradayas also, and this is, I think, a really, really, how do you say, passionating, great element in your book, right? Is that you show all the different influences also that these ascetics have, and that actually transform or color not only their practice, but also their teaching, their discourses. You know, you saw that you explain, that some sadhus that actually were married before, some were engaged in lay jobs before, some have studied yoga in Rishikesh, and known for its engagement with modern yoga. Some have some university degrees, sometimes in Ayurveda, also in yoga. Many have mobiles, as you said. Some even have iPads, like the digital Baba. Plenty are on Facebook. Some have actually read yoga books, other not at all. And many seems in contact with foreigners, even through teaching them, or because they receive money from them, or through their social media accounts. Some of them speak broken English, and some are even involved in publication. And we also know, and you mentioned it very well, that there's an initiation which actually symbolically cuts the world before, but we can believe that all the sadhus that more or less you've been with are, most of them, born after Indians' independence, right? If the oldest are in their 80s, let's say. So it means, that there's high chances, although many of them, as you said, have become sannyasis also in their childhood, but also many of them have probably been into the public school system, right? So probably many of them also have gathered information about yoga through all these the different institutions than the traditional sampradayas. And also we know that many modern movements, if we take from Shivananda, or we take the Paramatikirtan I was just talking about, or even the Bharat Sevashram Sangha, all these movements that were born in the 20th century, still they try to refer to effectively a link, with the Dastamis or whatever. So this really, I don't know what to do with that. What to do with this term? I understand, and I think it's perfectly justified your use of the traditional, because they are initiated in the traditional sampradaya. But at the same time, what you show is that actually what they do and what they teach and what they say has so many more influences than their sampradayas. You actually show that even some contradict completely the teaching of the sampradaya, right? In the understanding of some of the embodied practice that they are. So I wonder, what to do with that. I don't know. I really don't know. It's really an open question.
Yeah, it's a question, but the thing, I don't see very much the issue, because it's an issue if we look at these sampradayas as something static that never change over the centuries or even over the decades. The fact is that there is a lot of differentiation inside each sampradaya, because one sampradaya, there are so many lineages and there are so many gurus. And as I said before, the society is fluid, because this, theoretically, we have to imagine that these sadhus are on a religious path. And what is important for the guru and for the disciple is to reach the spiritual goal. So that's why there is the fluidity, and that's why this kind of being affected by different influences can be part of the game, because what is important is that you end towards your spiritual goals. And each sampradaya has some rules that you don't have to break, because otherwise you are kicked out. But then there is fluidity. Even when you break the rules, there are ways to adjust that. Sometimes it depends if you have money. But so there is a lot of gray spots. Also because I privilege the more old people, let's say. So most of the main informants are old sadhus who do not have like iPad or like a modern mobile phone. So sometimes they just use their devotees, or they have this old-fashioned Nokia just to be connected. So I privilege these kind of informants, because they are they are quite less attached to the social media and to that kind of influence. But this is changing quite quickly, I think. Also because often devotees don't realize that this is not, often devotees or followers, they give us present, like, technological things. That's why Digital Baba had the iPad, because a devotee gave it to him an iPad. And while an old Baba told me, like, I don't need anything. I just need a jolly, a bag to keep my stuff. You know? So I think the age is important. Like, you know, and I think maybe this doesn't come out a lot in the book, but there is a kind of age issue, and I try to privilege the older sadhus to collect information from them. So like Guru, who had several disciples, and so on. But yeah, as I said, there is fluidity, but fluidity was always there, and I learned this a lot with the Ramanandi Sampradayas, because really, if you check the PhD, I really realized that each state has its own center, and the rules of a center can be very different compared to the rules of another Ramanandi center in another state, like Uttar Pradesh and Rajasthan. Things works differently. So this is, I think, it's a kind of recognize the fluidity that is now present was in the past. Of course, today it's quicker, the change, because the inputs are many more. But it was always part of the game.
Sure, absolutely. It was just more a kind of a meta question of, you know, how do we deal with these different labels, right? But yeah, I mean, and your book just shows so perfectly this fluidity. It's absolutely fascinating. There's also a question I think I have, because I find your group absolutely very interesting. I think it's one of the first kind of real collaboration between ethnography and Indology, a direct collaboration, right? I mean, we know that sociology of India, you know, has been born into this dialogue with Indology, but here you had a living team of Indologists working with you, and this is quite a fascinating project for that, really. And I guess that the main question that was driving the project is an Indological question, which is, what is Hatha Yoga, right? And I'm a bit curious about that, because there's in your book, you explain us that the label Hatha Yoga never spontaneously occurred in my conversation about yoga with sadhus, right?
Yeah.
And you also said that it has not broadly used by ascetic practitioners, except from maybe some located in more Marathi environment. And there's a few exceptions. I think you said, for example, some Polagiri or some other have a board declaring themselves, you know, Hatha Yogis, you know, but you went to them and you said, well, to ask them what is Hatha Yoga, right? And this is one of the first things, you know, that I remember about this anthropologist trying to never bring any concept, right, to the people you are looking at, to see what they will bring themselves, right? And to try to really ask open questions, right? And so I would like to know what is the reality of this label Hatha Yoga in this contemporary world of sadhus?
Yeah, I mean,
you know, I mean, and why? Because you also use the term embodied practices, which I think is very interesting because it's an anamic term, so you're able to kind of drive all this. So, yeah, I would like you to elaborate a bit on that. Is to which extent this label Hatha Yoga is still used, and I think the next question would be, what do you think that your actual research, your own interaction with them, and because you know so well also the text and you know the discussion, what impact did it have on their own thinking about Hatha Yoga, and what also the overall project, because the ERC projects are, and this was such a success, so it has been widely promoted. And so what are the impacts also of the understanding of the sadhus? Because also I guess this research also is part of all this transformation and fluidity and all that you are mentioning. So I would like, to know a bit more on that.
I mean, as I worked with, I call them grassroots sadhus, but because they are sadhus who are not really engaging like with the foreigners, or probably they will never read my book because it's in English. So, and I cannot write in Hindi, of course. So a limit, I would say. So the book cannot engage with the Sādhus, first of all. And also the fact that when I asked her, what is Hatha Yoga? Because as you said, the topic was not ever mentioned. So I had to try to understand what is Hatha Yoga for Sādhus. I had to be very strict about that. And for me, it was shocking because as you will read, if you read and you are read, for them, Hatha Yoga is the intention, the deep intention of doing something. So the question for them was silly, because one sadhu told me like, it's like, I want chapati and I will eat chapati. I say I don't eat chapati and I don't eat chapati. This is Hatha Yoga. And so what to do with this answer? And usually I don't push, like, you know, if I don't push like my understanding of Hatha Yoga on Sadhu's understanding. Like if I ask like then CRIA, I never said like, oh, but no, the textual sources mentioned that Swami Swatmarama mentions that Hatha Yoga is Shatkarmas, and I never did that, because it's like, I'm not going to teach Sadhu that historically in the 15th century, someone has called Hatha Yoga these kind of practices. Because for me, what was important was really the understanding of Sadhus without putting, as I said, my understanding of basically the textual sources. And that's why for me it was fascinating, because collecting Sadhu's idea of Hatha Yoga, you actually have a wider understanding of what is Hatha Yoga. And it is an understanding that connected to tapasya. It is an understanding that connected to the retention of the breath, that probably connects it with the earliest textual sources on Hatha Yoga, where probably maybe they don't even mention the label. So it's like going in the past, I would say, before there is a systematization in the textual sources, because these also arose quite often while talking with Sadhus. They don't care about textual sources. So that's why they won't care about my book, because the text written and that can be read to everyone, it's not the core of the sadhana, right? Is the guru who is the teaching, who's the source of the teaching. So that's why it was interesting for me to put together this different understanding of Hatha Yoga, because they really seems not necessarily related to the descriptions that you find in the text. But then, of course, there are also sadhus who connected with Hatha Yoga as like Shatkarma, Asana, Mudra, and so on. And sometimes you could see this connection happening because maybe they were in Rishikesh, maybe they were in Lonavala, so they had this kind of different understanding and connection with more modern practitioners and so on. But I think this, and I think this is what made the Hatha Yoga project interesting also for the impact, is that when you have people telling you and all these kind of nuances, then you can actually read in a different light the text. So I think that this collaboration is very useful. I mean, I think in the field of yoga studies, it's going on quite a lot, or maybe it's just my impression, but it has to be multidisciplinary, because a text cannot be understood just by reading it. You have to try to imagine who are the audience, why it has been written. And there are all dynamics that sometimes people just working on a text maybe don't ask themselves. But I think it's fundamental to understand what's the purpose of an embodied practice, right? And I think it's fundamental. Like this description, does it correspond to something that is actually performed, done by someone? That's why embodied. So this description corresponds to someone, to a body who's actually putting it in practice to reach that goal or not. And I think if dealing with practitioners, this could make the text more alive, or can dismiss them, because maybe some of these textual sources were, I don't know, exercise for a pandit. We don't know.
Right.
Now the scholar working on text will kill me.
No, but I think it's a very interesting question, because it's quite amazing when we read your text that to see the little knowledge that these ascetics have actually of these texts. So this articulation with the lay society is very important. As you said, historically, some of these texts were made for patrons or what. So to understand this link. So what would be, I'm a bit worried just about the timing, because I see there's also quite a few questions. So I don't know, Jackie, if we have now to give the floor to the questions, or?
Yes, we can do. Would you like me to read some, or would you like to let the questions, Raphaël?
No, sure, you can do. I mean, I had plenty of other questions, so let's see what there is. I just want to give the floor also to other people. Otherwise, I can also have plenty of questions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just worried because you said the last half an hour, so I see it's only 20 minutes left, right? Am I right?
Indeed.
Indeed.
Yes, well, that's right. And if I have a quick look, and some of these questions you've touched on already, both of you actually, in your commentary,
Okay.
Raphaël, and then also in your answers, Daniela. But for example, one of them, which I think is a good one, is perhaps to come back to a little, is could you actually let us know the meaning of Sādhus that you experienced with your research? So how did you actually define Sādhu? Which I think you kind of answered. Do you think, Daniela?
Yeah, I think, but Rajini, let me know if you think I answered your question, because as I said, Sādhu, I use Sādhu in a very general way, and usually I don't call Sādhu. Basically, when I am with Sadhu, I call Babaji, Maharaj. So it's not the term that I use talking with Sadhus. So it's really an umbrella term. Tyagiji, it's really more fluid, the vocabulary there, because you have to respect these different identities. So yeah, I don't know if I answered, but let me know, please.
May I just jump into this question, because I think it's also related to the question I had. But so if I understand well, this term is used as a kind of an ethic term for you. You use it as a label, right? But would all the people you are studying recognize themselves within that term? I'm asking really because, coming from another background, mostly in Bengal and all that, I know that many wouldn't call themselves Sādhus in the one I study, which are very specific. So that's just maybe to precise.
I mean, that's an interesting question, because I never asked a Baba or a Sadhu, do you recognize yourself as a Sadhu? So I mean, it's an interesting question that I can ask next time I go to the Mela. But it never occurred to me that this term could be a negative term.
Really?
Because,
all right.
Yeah, because I mentioned the Sadhu Samaj when I talk in general with Sadhus, like in the Sadhu Samaj, and never said like, don't use this term. So I think as usual, it's really, I think it can be very state-based, like the term fakir, right? I've seen that some Sadhus in West Bengal will define themselves also as fakir. But this term is not used at all, like in Uttar Pradesh or in Rajasthan. Nobody will call themselves, I am a fakir, right? So I think this, as I said, the fluidity of the terms and the value of the terms can change from state to state. Probably that could be an interesting research we can do, Raphaël.
Definitely. I think it actually relates maybe to the one question I read, and I actually also had is, these regional differences, and to which extent actually maybe the life of the sadhus prior to their initiation is still important in their identity and community.
Sorry, can you? It's a question.
Sorry, no, because I think there's a question in the chat, if I'm not wrong, because you worked mostly in North India, but also you went in South India. So I think there's a question, if I'm not wrong, on a few words about the ascetic landscape in other parts of India, like the South.
Yeah, in the South, actually, not much, because in the South, I went to Mangalore because there is a nut center, very important there. Veronique Bouyer has done an incredible ethnographic work. And so we went there for the celebration of the Raja Yogi. So we went there. We went in Gujarat, but deep in the south, not. And good point, because this is, I think, it's another big lack that is present in the book. The South is not present, basically, because I cannot speak any South Indian language. So for me, it's a bit weird to have an interpreter. I prefer to talk directly with the people, because I think this is also a kind of power dynamic. You have someone who's speaking for you, and then it translates to you. The Sadhu doesn't understand what he's saying, if what he's saying is actually what he said. So it's these dynamics I really don't like. And again, the time was limited. I mean, I was already tired after 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, you did more than 2 years of field work. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I love, that's why I did do this job, because I like doing field work. So I like learning, and only spending time with people you can learn.
Jackie, did you have another question?
Yeah, there's another question here. Mark Robert here says that Daniela and Raphaël, this is a fascinating introduction. Thank you. The book sounds incredibly interesting. And let me just see, and they're excited that it's readable for non-scholars. But it said, if samadhi is a spiritual goal for sadhus, the thing they make so many sacrifices to obtain, do you have any idea or any feeling for how many have actually achieved it? And I appreciate that you said that there are other goals.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that what a sadhu means for samadhi can vary a lot. And like, for example, some sadhu understand samadhi as actually the time when they die. So there is only one samadhi, that is actually when you leave the body. And if you are a yogi raj, basically you will decide when to leave the body. And so it's really, what is a samadhi? It's really tricky question from one side. But many, as I said, also, it's not all the sadhus have samadhi or, moksha as a main goal. So that's also what corresponds to samadhi can vary a lot. And there is a section on the book where I try to put together all these different understanding of samadhi for various sadhus. Even there, you see that even among the same sampradaya, there can be different interpretation, because the path is very individual, I would say, and also dependent on the guru and all the path. And yes, the book is very readable because, first of all, I'm an Italian speaker, so I had to write it in English, and this makes everything easier because it's quite simple. I hope it's very easy, right, Raphaël? The English.
Absolutely, I confirm.
Yes.
There's no anthropological blah blah. It's
No,
just
not
great
at all.
for that.
No, I
Thank
don't
you
like
so
that.
much. And there's no intent to terrorize much and to hide the data behind some theory. So we go straight to the data. And this is really useful. And I told you that's what will make your book, I think, long lasting.
Yeah, and also because I like to understand things, and I like to understand things historically, like in a diachronic and synchronic way. So since my brain works like that, the book is organized in a way that even if you don't have a kind of Indological background, you can follow step by step. That's why the first chapters are are more historical, so that you can understand what is going to happen later on, because these dynamics have historical reasons. And so it's a kind of bringing the reader, because I know that many practitioners will be interested. And also a reason why I publish with Equinox is that it's not this kind of academic publisher who will make the book very expensive. Actually, it should have been cheaper, but then it became bigger. So that's why even the cost.
And you have great photos in it also.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Which maybe makes the price here.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. But they made me printing the photo in colors. So this also makes the book readable. Great. Yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, it's 40 pounds, something like that. And so it's still, I think, a bit expensive, but not that expensive like if you publish with other publisher, and will be more than 100, blah, blah, blah. So I tried to make it readable in the writing and affordable in the cost.
Indeed. Perhaps, Raphaël, you have the book there and you could show us. So you could just lift up the title so people can see it. And put that towards your face.
I can do it.
Your face.
Wait.
Yeah, double. There we go, the double. And perhaps you can flick inside, Raphaël. Thank you. I do have there are still some more questions in the chat. But I would also like to ask one, Daniela, because of the title that you've chosen for the book, which is From Tapas to Modern Yoga. And so I wondered, and it taps into one of the questions that's in the base here, is do you see contemporary Sādhus practice as modern yoga? Do you classify that as modern yoga? Or are you making the term modern yoga a separate division to only look at things that is practiced by non-ascetic traditions? I just asking that.
First of all, I have to thank Jackie for this title because we worked together. I don't know if you remember that, but we worked together on this title. So I really loved it. And the fact is that From Tapas to Modern Yoga is to stress that modern yoga is influencing also the practice of Sādhus, especially young one. And it's influencing, I would say, it's influencing, but especially in their approach towards foreigners right now. Could be something like that, because they use modern yoga. They are being influenced by modern yoga thanks to social media. And this is a good way for them, especially those who don't speak very much English, the social media and modern yoga gives them the terminology to interact with the foreigner practitioners. Then it depends what is modern yoga, right? So this is a big question. What is modern yoga? I could say that some Sādhus actually use a more modern approach of yoga as a kind of bridge with foreigners. Because of course, if you read the book, the understanding of yoga for Sādhus is different compared to the modern yoga, but simply because the context is completely different. So we are in a religious context. So we are talking with people, initiated people who have a specific religious goal, who will go through different lives to get that goal. And so I think once you have this context in mind, you can see that their approach cannot be the same, even if the practices can be similar and they can engage with modern yoga.
I want to react on that because that brought me to a question, because you mentioned the different influences as you've just done on contemporary practices of the Sādhus by modern yoga. But you also mentioned that Sādhus sometimes take some practices from other Sādhus that they see, and you also mentioned, of course, that a guru is the one that dictates what should be the sadhana. But at the end, we understand, if I understand well, that some practices are made not because the guru said, but because other peers, at the same level were doing. So therefore, I wonder what does make an embodied practice a sadhana?
That's a very good question. I think it's the context,
the goal.
Where you do, the goal and the context, because there are a lot of Sādhus, not a lot, but I met several Sādhus who learned asana practice from foreigners, like modern. Let's call it modern yoga, the asana practice, but just, I know that it's not that, but just to be very general, and that's the way they approach it. Is like, they recognize asanas, of course. Even asana can be part of their practice, but it's a very limited practice. So they learn from foreigners because they do it better. So if they want to learn asanas, to teach asanas to others, it's more likely that they will learn from foreigners, because a foreigner is more structured to do that, right? And so I think there are different knowledge. So Sādhus takes different knowledge, of course, but is the source of the knowledge, and for what you are taking this knowledge that is important, right? So, for example, if they take the asana practice from a foreigner, they are not using that for the spiritual practice. They will do it for a different, maybe more pragmatic reason that can be to be more fit or to make money or whatever. So I think this makes a bit the difference. And as I said before, the embodied practice is how you relate the tool to the reason why you are using the tool.
So I understand. So then there's this question of the lay society that is very interesting, I think, all over your book, as you just mentioned, this relationship between, laymen and these Sādhus. I mean, it's all over, and it's part of the religious history, of course, of Hinduism, right? As Jimon said, the dialogue between the renouncer and the man in the world, is part of the dynamics of Hinduism. But reading you, it seems that there's two different lay society, or two different society of laymen. There's the foreigners that we give lessons or take some from Sādhus. And what about the Indian laymen? So, because we know that now in contemporary India, also this modern Khan yoga is very popular in monk cities and all that. So, what is the relationship between this Indian lay society and the Sādhus? I mean, shall we say that there's still this kind of religious exoticism that makes foreigners still go to Sādhus because it's more exotic and less Indian lay men, or not at all? You see also the same interest now in the lay society in India to go to Sādhus to learn some practices?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know about yoga, I would say, because I think in India it's a bit more clear that you have, I mean, it depends what you mean for yoga, no? If you mean, I've seen, at least this is my experience, that in India there is this awareness of doing yoga for being fit, basically. Most of the people I meet that they do yoga, let's say not very high class, but it's like to lose weight. So there is
but so does your Sadhu, remember?
Yeah.
Your Sadhvi. Yeah, she does that also to lose weight, and she's a Sadhu.
But because she started again doing the asana, so she's a yogiraj. Yeah, she's a yogiraj. Right. So she learned all the asanas when she was a child. Then she stopped doing that because that's not the core of the sadhana. But then she became a bit healthy, and so that's why she brought back the asanas to be fit, because you need to be fit also to do the practice. So it's one of the reasons why Sādhus do asana, that's to be fit. But the important is that not to focus on the asana, because in the Sadhu society, that's not the main practice. The main practice is meditation. But I mean, I think Sādhus and gurus and the different ascetics in the different sampradayas, they still have a huge impact on the society. And especially because even in middle class people, just look at the Kumbh Mela and the numbers of the Kumbh Mela. They are increasing years after year. So there is this kind of curiosity still towards Sādhus, and also in asking Sādhus, like different questions that are not just related to yoga, but to life in general. And I've seen like really people from different background and economic also background to ask for advices to Sādhu. So I think it's really an important figure in the Indian society.
Thank you.
Plenty. I mean, I could stay a few more hours. I have plenty of questions here. I see the time, so I'll just limit myself to two quick questions. Do we finish at 8:30? Is that right, Jackie?
Yes. Okay. Yes, about 3 minutes. So. Yes.
All right, so you have 2 minutes to answer one
I want to answer this. What is the relation of the Sādhus with the food and or sex? This is very important.
Yes. I was about.
So that's very important. Of course, depends again. I mean, the majority of Sādhus are vegetarian, but I found some exception in West Bengal because they cannot renounce to fish sometimes. You can understand that, Raphaël. So the food is very important because it's part of the sadhana. So according to what you are doing, what you are practicing, you will eat accordingly. And of course, sex is like not allowed. I worked with the orders where celibacy is mandatory. If you have sex, basically you are losing all your power, and this connection between the semen, ejaculation, and spiritual power we have like since not 2,000 years, more or less, I don't know, 2,500 years. So it's very important, celibacy in the Sadhu society. In the groups that I'm working with, then of course there are some sadhus that slips on this norm, and that can happen because they are human beings. And I hope, Raphael, that what I wanted to stress, because sometimes there is an idealization of sadhus, people are scared of sadhus, but in reality they are human beings on a path and they are doing the best. I mean, not all of them, of course, but they are trying the best to be on this spiritual path.
I think this is what you show very clearly. And I think you also mentioned very clearly that you try to escape from the ones that did not have a very respectful, necessary approach to you. So
yes.
It should be mentioned.
Yeah, I mean that was the side effect of being a woman among
right.
In a male society, let's say, because basically is a male society. But thank God I'm old now, so I'm not from let's say an Indian perspective, I'm quite old, so not more.
Do we have time for one more question? I would have some.
Yes,
oh,
yes,
no, we
please,
should.
Raphaël. This could be your last one, Raphaël, and then we'll finish.
Okay, so I have the choice between a few. So I think you answered to one big question, which would be what would be the what could anthropology bring to Indology? I think you already answered that, but I had a question about the painfulness within these embodied practices, and to which extent they mobilize this concept. And I found it very interesting because you show us that they do mobilize it. Whereas usually devotees, lay devotees that engage themselves in painful religious acts, for example, devotees that walk on embers or that hang themselves on hooks, usually what makes these acts religious is not the pain, but it's denial, right? They say it doesn't hurt. Whereas your sadhus, that do certain form of tapas, and notably, having one's arms up and all that, they underline the pain down there. Whereas if you did that, it would have been in the lay society, it would have been like a sign of failure to feel the pain or a sign of a lack of grace. So I was just a bit curious about that.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I think there is a lot of, I don't know if we can say honesty or not, but probably is also the time is different, because I think, if I'm understanding correctly, you're talking about devotees who are doing this especially during a religious festival. So it's
exactly.
a pain that occurs in a second, in a moment where you are completely, I would say, filled and full of devotion, because the context is really like bringing you this kind of craziness, and you are part of the festival. While here you are people engaging with the pain on a long time. So for example, the Urdu Bahu, they told me, I mean, you cannot deny that there is pain, because this pain is constantly with you for years. They say, like, usually you lost the sensitivity of your arm after 3 years. So to deny that you are not feeling pain, I think would be not to be honest, right? And you have to be truthful, because this is, you have to say the truth.
Part of the path.
Exactly. So it's part of the path to recognize that the body, but sometimes there is this distinction. The body is in pain, but not the Atma. So, so this also is part, like, that is in the picture. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this such innovative book. It was so wonderful to have it. I think it's a book many of us have been waiting for a long time. This
Really?
question.
I'm
Yeah.
glad.
So
I'm
thank you
glad.
so much.
I'm very happy.
Thank you, Jackie, for hosting us. And
Yes,
thank you,
exactly.
everybody,
Thank
for your
you.
presence here tonight.
Yes.
Indeed. So thank you. Well, we did have some more questions, but you'll have to answer them another time in your next research project, Daniela. And Raphaël, thank you very much for your insights into Daniela's work and your reflection on some of the difficult questions.
Indeed.
But both of you, thank you so much for your time, but also to let people know they can buy the book via Equinox. And there is a discount code, I think, still valid if you put in the word yoga. They do get some sort of discount. But again, congratulations, Daniela. Thank you so much. And it's great to see this after such a long period of time, your work on the Hatha Yoga project. And Raphaël, thank you again for your time and reflection. It was very helpful. So good night, and thank you all.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.